Live Free TV with Lieutenant Colonel Alan West. Brought to you by the American Constitutional Rights Union. This episode, Economic Deception from the Left. Live Free.
Hey, greetings, everyone. Lieutenant Colonel Alan West here, the Executive Director of the American Constitutional Rights Union and the ACRU Action Fund. And welcome to another episode of Live Free TV, brought to you by the American Constitutional Rights Union. You know, it's just hilarious when you sit back and you listen to some of the rhetoric that's been going on in these first 100 to 120 days of the Trump administration. All the predictions about economic recession, although when we actually had the definition of a recession during the Biden administration, we were told that that's just white economist language. It really doesn't apply. But now they're trying to predict that and cast that upon the Trump administration these early days. And right now, I mean, when you look at the fact that since that April the 2nd, April the 7th, announcement for all the terrorists and the Liberation Day, all of the prognostications and what have you, the market has climbed and recovered all the losses and even more. I mean, S&P is into, bull market, not bear, bull market territory. So it's really kind of perplexing what we see happening early on. And I really want us to start thinking about this in the United States of America right now. This is truly a confrontation, a conflagration, an ideological battle, less about Republican or Democrat. It is not about political party. It is about understanding that relationship between the government and the individual, and which side on the political spectrum, I put it that way, is going to have that right balance in understanding that the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States of America established that the individual is sovereign over the institution of government. The government exists by the consent of the governed. And the government is not there to dictate and demand and force mandates upon you, but how you live your life. I mean, when I hear all this talk about how this administration that has only been there for 120 days, and oh, by the way, they're already trying to create impeachment articles against President Trump. For what? Because he's not doing what you wanted him to do, and because you lost on November the 5th of 2024, you don't impeach someone because of that. It has to be about high crimes and misdemeanors. No one was saying anything about, well, when you violate the Constitution and you allow millions of people to come into the country illegally, to include criminal, illegal immigrants, single military age males, members of terrorist organizations, that was not deemed a impeachable offense. When you go out and you don't listen to the Supreme Court that says you cannot relieve people of college student loan debt, and you do it anyhow, that wasn't an impeachable offense, according to the progressive socialist left. That's what I want us to start looking at. Who is standing up to make sure that they are siding with the Constitution as opposed to siding with an ideological agenda? Because, R&D to me is meaning less and less. I mean, constitutional conservatism, and conservatism today really being the classical liberalism that John Locke talked about. Natural rights theory, the fact that your unalienable rights of life, liberty, and property, that's what he wrote in the Second Treatise of Government, 1689. Those are your inalienable rights. Thomas Jefferson changed it to pursuit of happiness because we did not want people to believe that owning another person was an inalienable right, because slavery was still on the books back then. So I think it's so important that when we sit back and we start to listen, and it's so important to tune in to the other side, tune in and see what they're saying on their media outlets. I mean, it is an alternate universe. We have President Trump that is right now securing incredible amounts of financial investment into the United States of America and reestablishing relationships that were torn asunder. during the last administration. But yet we continue to hear this willy-nilly hand-wringing about the economy and it's gonna fail and all of these things. And, you get China to come to the table and, we still have 30 percent tariffs on them, 10%, which equals the 10% that they have placed on us. But we still have 20% on top of that. Yeah, people are coming out and saying that, China has played us. I don't think China and their economy is in a very strong position. I think that we're in a more dominant position. I think that what we're starting to do is looking at how we can isolate China and therefore isolate Russia and Iran and North Korea as well. Hadn't heard a lot of peeping from Kim Jong-un recently happened. So I think that we are doing very well economically, and I think that we're doing well when you look at these indices, the consumer price index, when you look at the price of gasoline, price of, food commodities, they're going in the right direction. They're going down. Stuff like this does not happen overnight, but the trends show that they are heading in the correct direction. As opposed to another administration, when they came in, the inflation rate was 1.4%. They raised it up to 9.1%. No angst coming out from the other side, their media outlets. Everything was just peachy keen. Everything was fine. We saw the gasoline prices go up. We saw how they went after our energy production, that we couldn't produce, consume, and export our energy resources. We're the Saudi Arabia of natural gas, but yet we had moratoriums put on the export of our liquefied natural gas, which meant that, you embolden Russia. Energy security, economic security does equal national security. That's one of the things that we're realizing now. But again, the most important thing that you have to start thinking about is what is that right and proper relationship between the individual and the institution of government? Should government be telling you what type of toilet you can have, and how much water you can flush, what type of dishwasher you can have? Shouldn't be telling you that. What type of car you can drive, what type of food you can eat. I mean, you want to talk about tyranny, telling me what type of house I can have and buy and how I can heat it or cool it? That's the path that we were on. Now, all of a sudden, we're not on that path, and, we should impeach him because we're not getting what we wanted. But we got to be very circumspect because they're not going to stop telling their misinformation and disinformation. And the midterm elections are coming up, and we don't want to see a repeat of what happened with President Trump in that he loses the support of the House and the Senate, and the next thing you know, everything goes, it's just stopped. That's why we have to pay attention to these things. That's why we at the American Constitutional Rights Union, we just try to call a ball, and a strike, a strike. Based upon what? The rule of law. And that's it. Based upon what? The right and proper relationship between you and the institution of government. I got a great clip that I want to share with you that comes from, a guy who used to be one of Newt Gingrich's top lieutenants back when he served in Congress from the state of Florida, and that's Joe Scarborough. Roll this tape.
The Biden presidency has made you richer than you have ever been. That's socialism? The Biden presidency has created a record number of jobs. Compare it to Donald Trump's presidency. That's socialism? The American dollar over the past few years, stronger than any time it's been in over a generation. That is socialism? Under Donald Trump, the federal deficit higher than ever before. The federal debt higher than ever before. Donald Trump broke records. Donald Trump, over his 4 years, raised the federal debt more than Bill Clinton and his 8 years in office, George H.W. Bush, his 4 years in office, Jimmy Carter's 4 years in office, and Gerald Ford's 2 years in office. He raised the federal debt more in 4 years than those presidents raised it over 18 years. I mean, you could go down one marker after another economically, and Donald Trump doesn't come close to the record of the Biden-Harris administration.
So, Joe and Mika, then why was the Biden-Harris economic record rejected November the 5th of 2024. Because the American people can read, the American people can understand what is going on with them. The American people know that their, dollar was not going as far as it was in the grocery store, at the gas pump. I already talked about the fact that when Joe Biden and Kamala Harris came into office, the inflation rate was 1.4%. And no, you cannot blame it on the Russian incursion into Ukraine, which, of course, Russia did not invade Ukraine during the Trump administration. It did during the Obama administration. I thought it was kind of interesting that Joe did not mention the Obama administration and the debt that rose in that time period. And he did not talk about the enormous amount of spending of the Biden administration. All of this Green New Deal stuff and the infrastructure bill and all this Build Back Better. It was just bloated government spending. President Trump had to spend more basically because of what happened with COVID. You have to understand that. If you take that out, no, there's no comparison whatsoever. But I guess, either way he goes, he's going to lose on that. But Biden-Harris, when they came in and immediately went after our energy production, put a kibosh on the Keystone XL pipeline, we saw the fact that now when you constrain energy resources, you increase the prices of commodities. And that's why we went from 1.4 to 9.1 in our inflation rate, highest that we had ever seen in the history of this country, pretty much. And if you want to be specific, before Vladimir Putin went into Russia, that inflation rate had already hit 7%. And the other thing you have to come to understand is that this whole thing about Biden creating jobs, well, there was a report that just recently came out that said some 400,000 jobs that the Biden administration claimed just last year, they were non-existent. And as well, when you talk about job creation and job growth, most of the job creation during the Biden-Harris administration was in the government, public sector, I'm sorry. That does not help the economy when government jobs and government spending is what? Close to 24 to 26% of your gross domestic product, your GDP. That's not success. And yes, it is socialism when you are telling people that you're going to force them to pay more money in taxes, but yes, what's the return on investment of that? See, you're going to continue to hear this from the left instead of them sitting and saying that the American people realized that the economy was not going in the right direction. The American people completely rejected our economic principles. The American people completely rejected the whole pay your fair share thing, because what is a fair share? I mean, you can just continue to write up. That's still not a fair share. Let's raise it some more. We cannot have, an economy where we are going after the people that are the job creators. And even you have Republicans now, as we get ready to have this big, beautiful bill, that are talking about raising taxes on the top earners in our economy. They're already paying anywhere from 53 to 57% of the federal income taxes for this country. How much more do you want? And then also you have to understand small businesses, and I learned this especially being on the Small Business Committee when I served in Congress. They don't operate from a corporate tax rate. They operate, subchapter S corps. They operate with a personal income tax rate. So if you're going to raise the taxes, then all of a sudden you're raising their business operating tax. How's that going to help our economy to grow? So what we see happening with our economy is a shift back to a free market enterprise economy. We're getting more countries to invest and bring money here so that we can have production and manufacturing and job growth here in the United States of America. Instead of growing the public sector, we're looking at how we can grow the private sector. That's not a bad thing, Joe. Once upon a time, you believed in that until you I won't go down that path. But again, the most important thing I want everyone to understand is that we have got to get back to constitutional governance. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, that's the legislative branch, Article 1. Article 2 is the executive branch. Article 3 is the judicial branch. Article 1, it lays out the 18 enumerated powers, jurisdictions, duties, responsibilities, purviews, however you want to look at it, of the federal government. We've got a federal government that's going way outside of those borders and boundaries. And that's why we have these debts and these deficits. And I agree. I don't want to see them explode under Republican or Democrat leadership. Remember, Joe, one of the things that Bill Clinton said in his State of the Union address after he lost in his 1994 midterm elections, and Newt Gingrich, your old boss, came in, and also he lost the Senate. Bill Clinton infamously said the era of big government is over. So Bill Clinton reduced the size and scope of the federal government. And yes, he did increase taxation, but people could understand and they saw where it was going. And guess what? Based upon constitutional conservative principles, getting the federal government back in its right box, we did have a surplus. Now, do you really think that anyone running on the Democrat ticket today could stand up and say the era of big government is over? No. And see, it's just those little tidbits that when you listen to the left, they kind of leave out. That's why we here at the American Constitutional Rights Union, well, we go and we listen to the other side. We listen to both sides. And we try to make sure that we are being governed based upon our Constitution and our foundational principles and values established in the Declaration of Independence and through the Constitution, our rule of law. Because when we don't follow those, being it Republican or Democrat, and I will tell you that when George W. Bush stood up and talked about compassionate conservatism, all he was talking about was big government from the right. And so we did see government expand and get into some things that, well, haven't really paid off. And Jimmy Carter, you want to talk about Jimmy Carter? Why do you think we had the 2008 meltdown that came during the Bush younger presidency? The 1978 Community Reinvestment Act, where all of a sudden Jimmy Carter comes along and says that everyone has a right to own a home. No, you don't. You have the right to life, liberty, and property, and the government should do everything to establish and set the conditions for you to be able to have a good quality of life, to promote the advancement of your liberty, and enable you to go out and acquire property. That's why I'm not really keen on property taxes down here in Texas. How can you tax people for owning their property? You can never own your home when the government says you have to continue to pay us in ad infinitum. But see, when Jimmy Carter did that, all of a sudden he created that subprime mortgage crisis that came 30 years later. Because all of a sudden government decided that they were the ones that would give you something instead of setting the conditions by which you can earn it. And that's what I want us to start paying attention to. That's why I want you to start listening to the words of these pundits and listening to the words of these quote unquote politicians. We need more statesmen, less politicians. We need more people that are going to tell you what you need to hear, not what they think you want to hear, because that's where we end up losing this great nation. Yes, socialism promises you everything under the sun. As Margaret Thatcher once said, the end result, the problem with socialism is that you eventually run out of other people's money. That's why that system has always failed as an economic system. We should not allow it to try to take root here in the United States of America. So next year is going to be very important. A midterm election cycle, which is really about who will control the legislative policy agenda going forward for the next couple of years. We don't want the progressive socialist left to be in charge of that, because all they're going to do is go down the path of, well, let's impeach him. Let's impeach him for waking up. Let's impeach him because, well, we don't like his tie. We don't want to have a country that's based upon, I don't know, arbitrary, empty, emotional rhetoric. We want to restore a country that's based upon our rule of law, the Constitution of the United States of America. That promotes and advances your life, your liberty, and your property. God bless you. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Live Free TV, and follow us at theacru.org. Take care.